But one man who's been warning of the threats facing Britain for years is former Defence Secretary Liam Fox. Dr. Fox, welcome to Never Mind The Ballots. What did you feel when you saw our diplomats standing at the Security Council this week for a moment's silence to the Butcher of Tehran?
Well, I wrote a piece myself saying that this was one of the most evil figures in that region. He was responsible for the murder of thousands of political prisoners, some of whose families I have met. He was regarded as you say, the Butcher of Tehran. And it was notable that on the streets of Iran, there wasn't the usual sort of turnout of mass mourning from the population, which I think says a great deal about exactly who Raisi was and the absolutely wicked record that he had.
So my sources in Whitehall say the Foreign Office had to be talked out of sending flowers to Tehran. I mean, what is going on over there?
Well, I don't know about the truth of that, but I do think that it's very clear that not every eye would have been wet in Iran at the news about Raisi. He, as I said, was responsible for many prisoners of conscience being hanged. He took the personal decision for many thousands of them. He was a murderous figure, and not everyone will be sad at his passing.
You're an expert in the area. How do you see it playing out in Iran? The fact their president was flying on a 25-year-old helicopter without any spare parts, kind of screams failed state to me. But do you think the regime's grip will be strengthened by this? How are they going to react?
Well, it's a brutal and repressive regime, especially against women and anyone with any different political views. It is what I describe as a thugocracy, which is an oppressive state run by criminals, but it's got a dangerous theocracy on top of it. And so as they begin to lose their grip, I think we will see what we've seen in most dictatorial states, which is that they will increase their levels of oppression until they can do it no longer. So in the short term, I don't think there is a good outcome in terms of the people of Iran or its neighbors or even the countries that it takes aim at, including ourselves, in exporting terrorism. But in the longer term, I think you have to expect that sooner or later you'll get reform and you'll get the mad mullahs replaced by something a bit more rational.
We can, but presumably in the meantime, you're on the side of the people that want to prescribe the Iranian Revolutionary Guard in this country?
Absolutely. I find it inexplicable that we haven't prescribed the Revolutionary Guard. They have been involved in all this repression. They're central to means of production in the Iranian state, so they will definitely have been involved in sending drones, for example, to Russia to commit crimes against humanity amongst the Ukrainian people. They were involved, they have admitted, in the direct attacks on Israel in recent times. They are part of the oppression, particularly of women in Iran. What more do they have to do before Britain joins the United States in prescribing them? And while we're at it, we might want to ask ourselves, while Iran Air, which was responsible for taking those drones to Russia, is still operating from Heathrow Airport, and why Iranian banks are still operating in the City of London.
Have you got a wind-up torch there and some candles stockpiled in case a volcano goes off, as Oliver Dowden's suggesting today?
Well, I do have a wind-up torch, but that's for different reasons during the night. And I think that we need to recognise that in the wider world there are big issues around water. I think we're very lucky in the UK that we have the supply of water that we have, but we do need to be a lot better about not leaking it all away.
Now, we'll get to it in a second, but you've written a book all about the threat of water, one of the many threats facing Britain, the coming storm. Is the government right to tell people to be stockpiling bottled water in case, we saw what happened in Brixham last week? Is that something we can expect to see more in this country?
It's always sensible, isn't it, just to take basic precautions about the things you may need in case something happens, or your electricity goes off, or you get a flood or whatever. But I don't think it's at the level of threat that I'm describing in the book, which is at a global level, the potential for serious disruptions in water supply for a range of reasons, including geopolitical reasons, which of course could be the basis for mass migration in different parts of the world. And that of course has an impact on global security, including ours.
A huge knock-on effect from us. It might not be our water supplies go off, but if they do there and millions of people move, guess they're heading to Europe like millions of people before them.
Well, you've got the situation where 40% of all the people on the planet depend on either their drinking or their agriculture or industrial water from a river that arises on the Tibetan plateau, the Indus, or the Ganges, Brahmaputra, the Mekong, Yellow, Yangtze. China has control over all of those headwaters at the present time. And as the glaciers tend to dry up, which they're doing at the present time, twice as fast in Tibet as anywhere else, you can see where competition for water is going to come. And that's where the highest proportion of the world's population are based and the most vulnerable on water supplies. And if you can imagine the sort of disruption you would get in East Asia, if you got a big interruption of water supply, then you can see the dangers there.
You're a former Defence Secretary. You know the threats that face in this country. It feels the government of slightly waking up to levelling with the public about the more increasingly dangerous world we live in. Is water off there? You know, are they paying enough attention to the possibilities of water conflict? Is that what keeps you up at night?
Well, I think it's the fact that the issue around water lies in so many different places. So you've got the role of water in trade. Are people trying to grow crops in the wrong parts of the world, which will have, again, an impact on their domestic population? We saw that happened in Syria when they tried to grow cotton, and ultimately they had 2 million people moving into their cities, which was just at the beginning of what turned out to be a civil war. We've seen the disputes over the River Jordan in Israel and the West Bank and with its neighbors. We've seen Turkey, Iraq, and Syria over the Euphrates and Tigris. There's a lot of potential there, and we lack a framework of international law to deal with that. We don't have enough agreements there. And then, of course, you've got the added elements of with changing climate, you get a change in global disease patterns as well, and mosquitoes will move to where it gets warmer. So there are a whole range of different things, and we tend to, in our systems of government, put economics and trade in one place, and we put development and aid in another place, and we put security in another. And I think we just need to do a much better job of joining the dots in trying to understand the risks that we face.
It does feel like the government have shifted their tone in the last maybe 4 or 5 weeks. We're seeing obviously the new national security law kick in with sweeping sort of arrests really of people accused of spying for China. We're taking a much harder line, expelling defence attaches from Russia. Do you think that, are you noticing that change, and what do you think is really driving that?
And we're seeing an increase in our defence spending, which is necessary as well. Yes, the world is becoming a much more unruly place. The consensus that we had around the need to move to international law and human rights and democracy and freedom has been breaking down under the influence of Russia and China and Iran. And we need to redouble our efforts, not just in our defence budget, but in our diplomatic posture. If China is making an offer to some of these developing countries, what's our counteroffer? So we need to be using all the tools of not only the British state, but we need to be encouraging countries like the United States to stop being inward-looking and protectionist and start getting back into a more Reagan-esque era of a confident, outward-looking America that was exporting its ideas.
In all likelihood, Donald Trump's going to win the next election now. He doesn't exactly scream outward, globally looking, and he's quite proud of his sort of often America first, inward stance. Is that worrying you?
It worries me to the extent that we have seen a big rise in global protectionism over the past 15, 20 years, and more than a tenfold rise between 2009 and 2020. And it may well be that you can protect some of your domestic industries, but if actually what you're saying is to developing countries that they're not going to be allowed to trade their way out of poverty by getting access to consumer markets in the wealthier countries, there's an increased likelihood that they will get in a boat or travel up through Central America or across Central Asia to get to that prosperity. So we've got to learn to link that in the era of globalization, you cannot take economic decisions in isolation from other consequences. And I think that while the business community has understood that much better, politicians are behind the curve.
Dr. Fox, while I've got you, I want to draw your attention to a piece in the Telegraph this morning. I don't normally name-check rival publications on this show, but your former colleague and successor, Ben Wallace, has written an extraordinary, eviscerating piece about the state of the Foreign Office, particularly their handling of the Sudan emergency, the evacuation from Kabul, the moving of the British Embassy in Kyiv to Lviv at the height of the start of the conflict in Ukraine, and basically says the Foreign Office seems to be the place where British interests seem to go to die. Is that something you felt when you were in cabinet?
Well, I would be dishonest if I didn't say I had some sympathy with what Ben Wallace has written there. And I do think that we need to be on the front foot, and I think that we cannot look at the world outside, be risk averse, and try to see the world preserved in aspect. We need to be agile. We need to recognize that in a changing world, we have to change too. And with the changing alliances we have, we need always to be placing our national interests front and center. And I think that sometimes means challenging the orthodoxy that places like the Foreign Office represent.
Dr. Fox, thank you very much. I've enjoyed your book. Well, I haven't said I enjoyed our chat. It's actually been massively scary and depressing. But at least you've got a nice desk there for a duck and cover behind you. But thank you for joining Never Mind the Ballots.
Thank you, Harry.
Take care.